Hey guys, welcome back to Greg's Fishroom. Today we are going to take a look at my blackworm culture behind me, and we're going to talk about everything you need to know to become an expert blackworm farmer. Now, blackworms, what are they? They are probably one of the best live foods that you can keep for a lot of your newt species, axolotls, Corydoras. Any sort of bottom feeder is really going to be into live worms in the bottom of your aquarium, and blackworms are able to survive in freshwater environments, which means once you put them in your tanks, they will live until they are eaten. So they don't create a mess, they don't decompose on you like fish food does, and it is just an absolutely wonderful food to have in your aquariums and to have ready in case you're trying to breed some of your more finicky species. The problem is, there's only one place in the entire United States that is shipping live blackworms right now. So as you can imagine, they're slammed. A lot of people are struggling to get a supply of blackworms to feed all of their baby fish and newts that they're growing, and it's caused quite a fiasco recently. So when that happened, I decided to set up my own culture. I've tried it in the past. It didn't work out that great, but this one is absolutely rocking right now. And so I want to share with you all of my secrets for success to keep your very own live blackworm culture. So come along with me and learn how to be a better aquarist. Alright guys, so as you can see over here, we have a table set up which is directly above the sump tank, which is serving as a sump for my entire fish room, all of my 50-gallon breeder aquariums. And this was put up rather hastily, so the stand itself isn't the best, but it's getting the work done. And the reason I set this up was because I was having a really difficult time finding blackworms, live blackworms, and when I did, I jumped on the opportunity and I got, I think, a half pound of blackworms. Now, they're almost impossible to come by at the moment, so I wanted to make sure I set up something which was going to work long term and was going to provide me with enough worms to suit my needs in breeding newts and Corydoras. So this is the setup. We have essentially a flood and drain plastic tray. This is 4 feet long by 2 feet wide, and it's only 3 or 4 inches tall. And this is the perfect container for a live blackworm culture. Now, if you've seen blackworm videos online, or if you've read articles about how to raise blackworms, a lot of people suggest a 10-gallon aquarium, and they suggest using brown paper towels or fish food, and I'm here to tell you that that's just a waste of time. What you need to do is you need to look at how the professionals do it and then scale it based on your needs. And so blackworm farms, they are literally ponds, like giant ponds outdoors, and the reason is you need surface area. So an aquarium most likely is not going to cut it, and not only that, but you need surface area, but you don't need height. So that's why this, in my opinion, is the perfect container to start with. And so you can pick up these flood and drain trays at any aquaponics store local to you. You can also buy them online, but the shipping is going to be kind of expensive just because it's such a large item. So anyways, start with something big. And so this is what I have. If we look over here, I think the brand says Active Aqua, but literally any brand will work. So that's what we have to start with. And then as you may have seen in past videos, essentially how I hooked this up was I drilled one hole over here. There's a bulkhead there. It's a 1/2 inch bulkhead, and that is where my water is coming in to this flood tray, and that 1/2 inch line is coming from my sump. So I have a little pump down there which is pumping just enough water in here to create some flow. And so this is running 24 hours a day. It's feeding from the water that's already in my sump. And over here we have two 1-inch bulkheads that have a pre-filter screen, and then it has a pre-filter, like a plastic pre-filter screen on it as well. So that allows just enough water to sort of come in and then go down those overflows. And essentially what it does is it allows maybe 1.5, 2 inches of water to be present in this tray at any one time. I put a little mark over here so you can see sort of the water height. If it gets too high, I'll clean my pre-filter sponges. But this has been going for 2 months and I haven't had to maintenance anything. So it's working pretty good. So those overflows then go back down into my sump area. So this is another sort of key for success here. I don't have just a 10-gallon little aquarium with a little sponge filter or something like that. I have, you know, this flood and drain tray, but it's connected to a 700-gallon system here for all of my fish. And so it's a much more stable environment. I also have the auto drip water change system set up on this whole system. So nitrates are never going to be an issue. And I have a feeling what happens to a lot of people is they set up little aquariums and you know, for whatever reason they overfeed because they want more worms, and then they just get a spike in their parameters and everything dies. So this is a much more stable environment, and so it allows the worms to sort of live stress-free. Speaking about stressing your worms out, when you get them in the mail, if you're getting them from a farm, they are dirty, and so they need to be washed to begin with until the water runs clean. That's because they're basically getting scooped right out of a pond. So it's nasty. There's muck, there's dead worms, there's leeches, there's all kinds of other crap that's in a culture like that. So if you can get a starter culture from a friend or from someone at your local aquarium club, it's probably going to be a lot cleaner. And with that said, once you have your worms, if you have a tray like this and you've plumbed it up and you've got a large sump system, or you've got some larger volume of water than just the 2 inches that's sitting in here, that's what's going to set you up for success. So with that said, let's take a look at our gravel. Now, a lot of guides online will say use large, coarse gravel. I've literally used like the smallest gravel I could find, and I think it's working out pretty well, and the worms seem to love it. So, you know, you might not be able to see this, but anywhere you see where it looks dirty or red in the water, those are worms. So like all of this is all worms. It's kind of hard to see, but anywhere where it looks like it's just dirty, that's actually worms. The little tiny heads of the worms are sticking up out of the gravel. I don't know if we're going to be able to focus on it. We'll do our best, but they are literally covering the entire surface of this pond, and that's taken about 2 months to get from my starter culture to a quite large culture here. And you can see the food that I'm feeding them primarily are these really cheap veggie wafers or spirulina wafers. They are aquarium stable, so they're not going to like dissolve and make a huge mess. So they stay pretty well intact for 24 to 48 hours, well, which is way long enough because these worms, I put these in only an hour or two ago, and you can already see the worms are crowding around every single one of these. So essentially what's happening is the worms that are within like 1 square foot of each one of these wafers has slowly migrated over to these wafers to start chowing down. And so these will be completely consumed within 24 hours. You can also see we've got quite a few pest snails in here, and I just clean those up as I go. Anytime I see big ones, I'll pick them out, but you know, that's bound to happen, is getting snails in a container like this, and they're just eating off the same food. So I use the spirulina wafers. The cheaper the better, honestly. As long as they don't make a mess when they hit the water, you're good. And my fish won't touch them anyways, so it's a good way to use the food that's available. Other things that I feed, I will feed my dead fish. Anytime a fish dies of old age or whatnot, I'll throw it in here and they will eat it. They'll eat it within, again, about 24 hours and it will be completely gone. Also, I've got a lot of plecos, and anytime I have a day or two old zucchini or green beans or any vegetable matter that's getting pretty gross, I'll just toss it in here as well. And again, they consume that really quickly. So that's primarily what I feed. I've heard people say feed like crushed spirulina flake food or brown paper towels and things like that. I mean, the flake will just make a mess, right? It will sort of go everywhere, which you would think means that it's going to feed the worms, but really what you want is the worms to travel to the food. That way you don't have a giant mess all over the place, and you can kind of gauge the population size that you have going on. And as for the brown paper towels, I don't know. I mean, if you think brown paper towels are going to grow worms quickly, it may keep them alive, but I don't think it's going to keep them happy. And you know, that's really the name of the game, is to feed them enough so that they grow quickly and multiply. And so for me, that means spirulina wafers primarily is what I'm feeding. Now, sometimes if you're feeding blackworms, it's recommended that you keep them in the fridge. So if you buy a half pound or a pound and you're feeding your axolotls or something like that, you keep it in the fridge. That's good for preserving the food, but you know, it's not an environment where they're going to grow or thrive. It's just an environment where you're keeping them alive long enough that you can feed them to your animals. I don't think it's the best. I don't think it's the best solution. It may work for some people, but for me, I would much rather have a thriving colony of worms that are gut loaded and super happy and healthy that I can pick from to feed my fish, instead of something that's been sitting in the fridge for a few weeks. You know, but that's just me. So as for the gravel and the water height here, you can see it's maybe about a ½ inch from the gravel to the top of the water here. And that's pretty important, because these worms, what you'll see is they stick their foot down in the gravel, and then they stick their head up, and they just sort of like wave their head around. And I know it's not going to focus, so it's kind of a bummer that this camera doesn't have a macro view, but you can see the worms just sort of wave their heads around, and they're looking for stuff that's in the water that's passing by. But they also live in the shallows in their natural habitat, in their natural environment. So they're usually on the very shallow shores of a lot of ponds and things like that, and not in any great quantities, mind you. They're all spread out, but they like shallow water, and so being able to provide them with a little bit of flow, enough gravel that they can sink down and feel secure by completely going into the gravel, small enough gravel that they can really spread out and that you can get a nice big colony going, and then shallow water overall, so that they can still make it to the surface if they need to, although I don't think that they really do. It just provides more oxygen because it's got more surface area, and so the shallows is I think where they do best. You can keep them in deeper water aquariums, and it seems like they're fine in an environment like that. But really, anytime I go through a breeding project like this, I try to ask myself, what is the optimal thing? Like, what do they expect? What do they do in the wild? And so if you can more closely mimic that, usually what you're getting is happier animals that are going to reproduce more rapidly. And that's certainly what I've seen here. So this is the tank. This is the setup. This is everything I feed them. This is how it's all plumbed and how it flows, and you know, the blackworm culture. So if I had the space, I would set up more of these, because it is a super hot commodity at the moment. And I do have one newt in here. This is like the luckiest newt on the planet. He is chilling in here because he's able to eat the blackworms that are dumb enough to get too close to him. So there's little holes in the bottom of this container. Oh, so you see, just did it right there. As soon as those blackworms stick their head up through the holes in the container, he just chows down. So he's literally got a 24-hour buffet open all around him for these blackworms. So I'm doing this because I want to see how healthy these guys are when they're fed. Basically, as much blackworms as they could possibly want. And the blackworms are definitely holding up their end of the bargain there. So, you know, it's an idea, right? Like, you can put animals on top of a flood tray like this and give them a natural food source. And he seems pretty fat and happy. So I think he's doing pretty well in this environment here, I would say. So anyways, that is the blackworm culture in its entirety. That's why I set it up the way I did. And we'll step back and we can take the whole thing in. I would like to try something like this outdoors or potentially in my greenhouse. However, I don't think it would work quite as well because you would have mosquito larvae, you would have potentially dragonfly larvae and other things that would get into a culture like this, and it would just degrade the culture over time. So I think for now, this is going to do it for me. I'm going to keep it indoors and keep them continuously growing. And every time I go to a club auction these days, I am bringing some live blackworm cultures with me. And anytime a friend who's local to me needs them, I have them. So it's proven invaluable so far in the breeding of my newts and my Corydoras, and supplying some of the folks that are local to me, so that they don't have to spend an arm and a leg buying them online. So that's about it. One other thing, if you're going to try to harvest blackworms in a situation like this, what I found is a really good way to do it is to take a net, and when they're all gathered in one spot, like around one of these algae discs, you can just scoop the net and scoop all the gravel, and once you have that, you can put it in a bucket with some water. And then I just take that the scoop of gravel that's in the net, and I just sort of bump the bottom of the gravel. And what happens is all of the worms go up to the top, and they will sort of get ejected from the gravel itself because they're lighter than the gravel is, and the gravel will fall back down. All the worms will sort of float to the top of the gravel, and then you can just extract those with a turkey baster. So that's what I do to collect and feed the worms. So anyways, guys, I hope this was a good look at a successful, thriving blackworm culture. I haven't seen anything quite like this set up at this scale inside of a fish room, but I would more than be willing to help anyone that has any questions setting something like this up yourself, because I think more hobbyists need to breed live blackworms, feed them to their fish, and have them available to share with others. If literally one farm, blackworm farm, went out of business, the entire United States would be out of their supply of blackworms. And I'm sure there's thousands and thousands of axolotls and hundreds of axolotl breeders and newt breeders who would be in a pretty big bind if something like that happened. So it's a sustainable food source. It utilizes a lot of the scraps and the leftovers that I have in my fish room, and it's a healthy and nutritious, long-lasting live food source that you can put in any of your freshwater aquariums, and they do great all the way up until the point where they're eaten. So that's what we got going on here. Hope you guys enjoyed the look at the blackworm farm, and I'll see you guys later.